Imagine you're 15 years old. A judge looks you in the eye and says, "I sentence you to life in prison." And then he methodically repeats it 3 more times. 4 consecutive life sentences for crimes where you didn't kill anyone. Sound like a distorted reality? What if your 24-year-old partner, the adult who was the ringleader, received a much lighter sentence than this 14-year-old boy? The system branded him a lost cause, a superpredator who was easier to throw away and forget. But what if, 11 years later, one of his victims came to court and shared something no one had ever heard? This kid didn't just participate in the robbery. He saved her from a much worse fate by stopping his adult partner. This is the story of Markus Young, a child sentenced to die in prison, and the legal loophole that gave him his only chance at salvation. It was June 2000 in Tampa, Florida. The asphalt was melting from the heat, but the city was gripped by a different, chilling fear. Police reports were filled with a series of brazen armed robberies. The signature was recognizable. In your face, gun to the head, very loud and aggressive. Victims described 2 people. One was clearly older. He gave the orders, shouted, and held the gun. That was 24-year-old Rico Bethia. The second was just a kid. His name was Markus Young, and he was 14. In 30 days, they committed 4 robberies that would change their lives forever. Markus later insisted he wasn't the gunman. His job, as he understood it, was simple. Grab the money, grab the videotape from the VCR, and get out. He was a follower. At 14, you don't wake up thinking about buying a gun and robbing a hotel. You trust adults. And the adult, Rico, had promised him an easy $50, money his mother desperately needed. One of the robberies happened at a Comfort Inn. The clerk, let's call her Mira, saw 2 men walk in and immediately felt something was wrong. Rico, the older one, asked where the restroom was and headed down the hall. At that exact moment, Mira's colleague, Rosa, came out from that hallway. There was a piercing scream. Mira ran toward the sound. The scene was terrifying. Rico was holding Rosa with a gun to her head and then immediately pointed it at Mira. "Don't move!" he yelled, but Rosa somehow managed to break free and run for help. Rico tried to grab Mira, but she pushed him away. Realizing their plan had failed, both robbers fled. But another robbery, at a different hotel, went according to their plan. Almost. The victim was Jessica, a young woman at the front desk. They had already come in to scout the place an hour earlier. Now, Markus stood to her left at the counter, while Rico, gun in hand, simply vaulted over it. He grabbed Jessica by her ponytail and pressed the barrel of the gun hard against her temple. "The money! Give me the money!" he growled. With trembling hands, Jessica opened the register. "The safe! Open the safe!" "I can't. I don't know the code," she cried. "If you don't open it, I'll blow your head off. I'll kill you, right here, right now," he screamed. And at that moment, according to Jessica, something in Rico's head switched. He stopped thinking about the money. He started telling her what he was going to do to her, repeating filthy threats over and over. Markus, who had been standing in the lobby, walked up to the doorway. He looked at his 24-year-old partner and at the crying girl. And he spoke, quietly but firmly. "You can't do this. We have to go." Rico became enraged. He grabbed Jessica by the hair again, yanked her up, threw her to the ground, and kicked her as hard as he could in the back. And then they left. That moment, that intervention by a 14-year-old boy, would echo in a courtroom 11 years later. But back then, they were speeding away in a green Chrysler Sebring when they were spotted by Deputy Sims. A short chase, a turn onto a dirt road, a dead end. The officer jumped out of his car with a shotgun. A minute later, backup arrived, and handcuffs clicked onto the wrists of 24-year-old Rico and 14-year-old Markus. A search of the car turned up a .38 caliber revolver with 6 bullets, $472, and a VCR. There was a tape inside. When the police put it in a TV, they saw the robbery. Rico entered first, followed by a tall, skinny teenager, Markus Young. The 30-day crime spree was over. The legal process was just beginning. Markus is 15 years old, sitting in a juvenile detention center. The court, the lawyers, the papers, it all flew by so fast he barely understood any of it. And then, the phone rang at the front desk. Deputy Miller was on the line, calling the prison's classification department. "Listen," she said, "we've got a situation. We have a kid here, a juvenile, Markus Young. He just got life." Silence on the other end. "What, 1? For murder?" "No, 4. 4 life sentences without parole, consecutive. For robberies, he's 15. The prison staff was in shock. They had never seen a sentence like that for a child. An hour later, they came for Markus and pulled him from the juvenile general population. They threw him in confinement, solitary. A guard came. "Mr. Young, you need to understand. You're not getting out of here because of your sentence." "Nah, that's a mistake." "That can't be right," Markus replied. The guard sighed. "Son, you don't understand. You are going to die in prison." "Who's gonna die in prison?" Markus smirked. "I'm not gonna die in prison." His brain refused to accept it. And now, for the central paradox of this story. The Florida justice system looked at 14-year-old Markus, who was the follower, and gave him 4 consecutive life sentences. He would have to serve 1 life sentence, then begin serving the 2nd, then the 3rd, and then the 4th. It was a guarantee that he would die in a cell. And then they looked at 24-year-old Rico, the adult leader who had the gun and who threatened to kill Jessica. Rico received 1 life sentence, and it was concurrent, which in reality meant a much lesser punishment. Markus Young was simply erased. He was thrown into solitary confinement because the system didn't know what to do with a 15-year-old sentenced to die in prison. He was officially a throwaway kid. So who was he, this 14-year-old superpredator, as the press called them? Markus grew up in Tampa in the early 90s, in a neighborhood politely called low income. Crack wasn't just a drug, it was the economy, a curse. You grow up seeing your 17-year-old neighbor driving a car with custom rims while you have no food at home. The answer for how to get that same car was simple. Take 2 rocks of crack for $25, cut them, sell them, and you get 40. At 13, you're juggling that money and you feel like a king. His teacher, Ms. Price, remembered 12-year-old Markus. He'd be late, tell jokes, fix his hair, and then, casually, pull a thick wad of cash from his pocket. He had a pager. Ms. Price said he wasn't aggressive. The only disciplinary report she ever wrote was when he cursed because she took that pager away. And you know where he ran when he got kicked out of class? To his mom. Home was the epicenter of chaos. His mother, Stephanie, whom he adored, was in the grip of a 19-year crack addiction. Sometimes she would just lock Markus and his sister Ebony in a room and leave for days. Markus was 11. His sister was 15 and she had just had her own baby. 11-year-old Markus dropped out of school, not for drugs. He dropped out to stay home and babysit his niece, while his 15-year-old sister tried to work. "It was just me and my sister," he would say. "My mom wasn't there." But he looked for her. He would get on his bike and ride through the neighborhood, knowing all the crack houses. He'd find her there, high, and pull her by the arm. "Mom, let's go home. Please, come on. You need to eat, take a shower." He was a child trying to be a parent to his own mother. Stephanie would later admit in court that her addiction destroyed everything. Another relative, who was like a father to Markus, remembered him very differently. The sweetest kid you could ever meet. He showed pictures from his wedding, where a little Markus in a tuxedo was the best man carrying the rings. This was no superpredator. This was a kid desperately trying to survive. The irony was that the main dealer his mother, Stephanie, bought crack from was that same 24-year-old Rico. And one day, Rico came to 14-year-old Markus with a proposition. Years passed. Markus Young was no longer a 15-year-old teenager. He turned 18, 20, 23. He grew up behind bars, transferred between Florida's most violent prisons. In the prison system, they call kids like him jitterbugs, fresh meat. A teenager in an adult facility with a life sentence was a target. He had to prove his right to exist every single day. He tried to get an education. He filed request after request. I want to study. Sign me up for classes to get at least a high school diploma. He was denied time after time. Why? The unit manager would tell him. Your sentence is till death. Why would we waste resources on someone who's never getting out? You're an LWOP, life without parole. The end. Meanwhile, his case was quietly dying in the courts. His public defenders filed appeals, motions to reconsider based on his age, on the disproportionality of the sentence. Every motion was denied. By 2006, Markus Young had exhausted everything. There were no more appeals, no more motions. It was a legal dead end. But it was right at this time that a team of lawyers from the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, an organization specializing in hopeless cases, took up his case. And Markus's case was the most hopeless of all. They faced an impossible task. How do you defend a guy with 4 life sentences for non-homicide crimes? They had a strategic dilemma. They could talk about his childhood, abandoned, a drug-addicted mother, poverty. But in that super-predator era, this would only confirm the worst stereotypes. The prosecutor would stand up and say, "See? Damaged goods. It's a good thing we locked him up forever." And then, after Markus had already been in prison for 10 years, when all his appeals were dead, something happened that changed the entire game. Lawyers from EJI and other organizations brought a similar case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was Graham vs. Florida. In those years, Florida was an anomaly. It was the nation's leader in sending children to prison for life for crimes where no one died. For years, lawyers had banged their heads against the wall of the state courts, arguing these sentences were unconstitutional and were denied every time. The U.S. Supreme Court looked at this practice and said, "Enough." The decision was simple, but it changed everything. It stated, children are different. Their brains aren't fully developed, they are impulsive, they are susceptible to influence, and they cannot fully grasp the consequences. And most importantly, the Eighth Amendment, which bans cruel and unusual punishment, does not allow a state to simply sentence a child to die in prison and throw away the key. The state must give them a meaningful opportunity to obtain release. It must give them a second chance. For Markus Young, this was a resurrection. His case, legally dead, was suddenly alive again. The court ruled. Markus Young's sentences, all 4 life terms, were illegal. They were vacated. This meant that after 11 years, he would return to that same courtroom. And a judge would have to give him a new sentence, only this time, looking not at the 14-year-old kid, but at the 26-year-old man he had become. The courtroom was buzzing with quiet tension. After 11 years, Markus Young, now 26, was once again sitting in front of a judge. This was his only chance, but the prosecutor had other ideas. For him, this was a chance to remind the court, one more time, what this man had done. "The state intends to call 4 witnesses," he announced, 2 officers and the 2 victims. Sandra Christopher was the first to enter. This was the first time in 11 years she had testified. She described how the gun was put to her head, how she was sure she was going to die. Your life really does flash before your eyes, she said quietly. She remembered how they screamed, threatened, and kicked her. Ma'am, the prosecutor asked, are you prepared for the defendant to be released? Sandra shook her head. No, I am not prepared for him to be walking around where I live. It was a powerful blow. But on cross-examination, the defense got her to admit that one of the attackers was a lot more talkative than the other, making it clear Rico was the ringleader. But the real explosion happened when the second victim was called, Jessica. This was the girl Rico had grabbed by the hair. She took the stand and began her story, how Rico vaulted the counter, put the gun to her head, demanded she open the safe, and threatened to blow her head off. Her voice faltered as she reached the most terrifying part. And then, something in his head switched, she said, looking at the floor. He stopped thinking about the money. He started saying what he was going to do to me. And what was the defendant, Markus Young, doing? The prosecutor asked. Him? Jessica looked up. He wasn't in the room. He was standing in the lobby. So he just watched? The prosecutor pressed. No, she said. He heard what Rico was saying. He came to the doorway. And he told him, you can't do this. We have to go. The prosecutor froze. This was not in the reports. Rico went ballistic, Jessica continued. He grabbed me by the hair again, threw me on the floor, and kicked me in the back. And then they left. Markus made them leave. The judge leaned forward. That's not all, Jessica said. A few years ago, I wrote him a letter in prison. You what? I wrote to him. I sent him pictures of myself. I wanted him to know who I was and how that day affected my life. But I also wanted to tell him that I forgave him, and I wanted to thank him, because whatever his reasons were, he stepped in. He stopped that day from being even worse than it was. She looked directly at Markus. I can only tell the court one thing. Markus did not have the gun. He did not touch me. The only thing he is guilty of is being in the wrong place with the wrong person. When Jessica left the stand, everything had changed. This was no longer a story about two identical monsters. This was a story about a 24-year-old predator and a 14-year-old kid who, in the crucial moment, did the right thing. For the first time in 11 years, Markus Young had not just a legal chance, but a moral chance at salvation. Now, the defense needed to show the court not the 14-year-old boy, but the 26-year-old man. Rick Andrew, a prison consultant and former Department of Corrections employee, took the stand. What can you tell us about Mr. Young's disciplinary record? The lawyer asked. To be honest, I could hardly believe it, Andrew said. This guy has been in the system for 11 years. He went in as a child. We call kids like him jitterbugs. They come in, they're scared, and they feel like they have to make a name for themselves. They fight, they join gangs. It's a survival mechanism. He flipped through his notes. Markus Young has been through the most violent prisons in Florida, places where assault and stabbings are just part of the daily routine. And in 11 years in that hell, he has one disciplinary report. A murmur went through the courtroom. One report, Andrew repeated. You know what it was for? For not making his bunk on a Saturday morning? Andrew continued. The system gave this kid nothing. They denied him an education because he had a life sentence. Why waste resources on him? So he did it himself. I met with him for an hour. And I'll tell you this, if I were putting together a crew of inmate trustees today, I would want Markus Young to be one of them. Next was a psychologist, Dr. Otto, who explained to the court what was obvious to him. Children are different. He talked about the immature brain, susceptibility to adult persuasion, and the inability to fully understand another's perspective. And finally, the defense called Markus Young himself. He was 26. Your Honor, he began. First of all, I want to take full responsibility for my actions and my role in these crimes. I live with regret for that every day. I apologize to my victims." He talked about how he spent 11 years trying to be a better person, getting certificates, working with elderly and mentally ill inmates. "I am not the same person I was," he said. Then, it was time for cross-examination. The prosecutor was ready. "Mr. Young," she began, "you're testifying today that you were forced to commit these robberies because Rico Bethia threatened your mother's life. Threatened her because she allegedly stole drugs from him. Is that true?" "Absolutely," Markus answered firmly. "You're saying that now," the prosecutor raised her voice. "But sir, the police spoke to you after your arrest in 2000. Correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "And staff from the Department of Juvenile Justice spoke to you. They tried to build a profile to understand what happened. Correct?" "Yes, ma'am, they came and interviewed me." "And you never," the prosecutor emphasized, "told any of them one word about your adult co-defendant threatening your mother." The trap was sprung. Markus looked at the prosecutor. "No, ma'am, I did tell," he replied calmly. "I told my public defender. Her name was April Hughes. I told her the whole story about what happened. And you know what she told me? She said she didn't want to hear it. She didn't care. She never brought it up in court. And I never testified at my trials. I always stayed silent." The prosecutor was stunned for a second. "So is that true?" she asked, trying to regain control. "You only committed these crimes because you were threatened?" "Ma'am," Markus said, "I wasn't the gunman. My job was to grab the money and the tape. And the thing that pushed me to do it, it was my mom. I was trying to, as they say, save face for my mom to cover her debt. He said he would kill her. And then he'd give me $50. That's all it was." The prosecutor sat down. The defense had painted a completely new picture, not a story of a 14-year-old gangster, but of a child who committed robberies to save his drug-addicted mother from her dealer. The room fell silent. Time for closing arguments. Markus's lawyer, Karen, stood up. "Your Honor, what Mr. Young did 11 years ago was serious. But we are here because the Supreme Court said that children are different. 11 years have passed. And from that moment on, he has worked incredibly hard to become a better man." Then, the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state of Florida requests 40 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. The defendant is 26. He would get out around 50. That gives him that meaningful opportunity for release that the law requires." There was silence. All eyes turned to the judge. "Mr. Young," he began, "I see your certificates and diplomas. Congratulations. But you know what that proves to this court? It proves the Department of Corrections has been effective." Markus felt a chill run down his spine. "Sir, you had a real gun, and you knew it. You knew where the line was, and you crossed it. You have no idea how this affects victims for the rest of their lives." The judge leaned back in his chair. "I hear from attorneys all the time. Please don't throw this young man's life away. If I let you go today, as your attorney requests, I might as well be giving you the key to the city. That would be a reward, a gift. You are not getting it, sir, because you do not deserve it." Markus's lawyers lowered their heads. "I heard your words," the judge continued. "I believe you have remorse. I believe you are rehabilitated." Markus looked up. He acknowledged it. "But," and that "but" hit like a hammer. "But I am listening to these victims, sir. And I do not believe this court should rely on your prison conduct. This is about personal responsibility. You have no lawful basis to play the blame game. You have no basis to blame Mr. Rico for your behavior." The judge had openly acknowledged his rehabilitation and then openly declared he was going to ignore it. "On count number, I sentence you to 30 years in Florida State Prison. On count number, 30 years. On count number 30 years, all sentences to be served concurrently. The gavel struck. Instead of 4 consecutive life sentences, he got 30 years concurrently. It wasn't the 40 the prosecutor asked for, but it wasn't the 11 he had already served. It was 30. Markus sat motionless. One thought pounded in his head. I showed him how I grew. I survived the worst prisons, and he looked at me and said, "Yes, you're better, but I don't care. It means nothing." His lawyer, Karen, was crushed. "That was the entire point of our case," she said in the hallway. The judge said good behavior in prison is expected, not rewarded. But the Supreme Court said that is exactly what must be rewarded. 30 years is not a second chance. As Markus was driven back to prison, he stared out the window. 30 years. But then, something clicked in his head. I can't let this break me, he told himself. He remembered what his sentence was before that day. Listen, he would say later. I was supposed to die here. They told me I would die in a cell. And now? Yeah, it's still a little bit. But I have hope. I see light. Before, there was only darkness. Now there's light. He decided to fight. I'm going to fight for what I believe in, he said. And I believe that I've changed. I'm not that 14-year-old kid. And his lawyers immediately filed an appeal. They realized the judge, blinded by the logic of retribution, had made a fatal legal error. He himself had handed them the weapon to overturn his own sentence. In the Florida Court of Appeal, Markus's lawyer, Paolo, stood before 3 new judges. We are here, he said, because the lower court openly failed in its duty. It failed to base its decision on rehabilitation, as is expressly required by Graham v. Florida. One of the appellate judges frowned, looking at the transcript. One moment, I want to clarify. Did the trial judge find that Mr. Young was, in fact, rehabilitated? Did he find that as a matter of fact? Yes, Your Honor, Paolo replied. He said it out loud. I believe you are rehabilitated. The judge nodded. And that is a fundamental point. And he said he would not consider that factor. Exactly, said Paolo. He explicitly stated that he disagreed with the Graham decision's requirement to do so. The judges looked at each other. The trial judge hadn't just made a mistake. He had openly acknowledged rehabilitation and then openly declared that a U.S. Supreme Court decision did not apply to him, and he would not follow it. Markus Young is still in prison, but this is no longer just one man's fight. It's a fight over what the law itself means. What matters more, the mistake of a 14-year-old child or the efforts of a 26-year-old man who proved he had changed? This story forces us to ask hard questions. What is justice? Do we imprison people to punish them or to rehabilitate them? And if a person who did something terrible at 14 proves they have become someone else, do they deserve a second chance? Or was the judge right that the past can never be forgiven?